So I wrote a book, and that's a pretty weird thing to do. In all honesty, I wrote a book, I published a book about 2 months ago is when it first went on Amazon, and I am extremely proud of it. I spent years working on this, and it took a ton of work, and it might not be the best book in the world. It might not even be good, to be honest, but I did it. It's something that I dreamt of doing since I was a kid, and I am very proud of it. But this isn't some self-congratulatory video about how amazing I am for publishing a book, because it's honestly not that hard. I know that might be some controversial statement, but in reality, publishing on Amazon is extremely easy. Writing a book, on the other hand, is one of the hardest things I've ever done, and it made me hate myself, and it sucks so much, but I also love it, so here we are. To start this thing off, I wanted to do an overview of the publication process from writing a first draft all the way to publishing the book, because I know a lot of people from the outside looking in, it seems like this huge daunting thing, and if you've ever dreamt of writing and publishing a book, it can seem impossible, but I'm here to tell you that it's not that hard. You just kind of have to do it. But I hope that hearing someone else's kind of journey through it will help you. It'll make it seem more doable, more like a realistic thing that you can accomplish. Before I jump into it, I want to say that this is my process. This is what personally works for me. And everyone has their own methods of what works for them when both writing and publishing a book. And if anyone tells you that there's only one way to do it, they're wrong. They're probably lying. They're probably trying to sell you something. With that in mind, take from this what you want. You can use my methods. You can completely disregard them as garbage. That's totally possible. Yeah, let's jump into it. The first draft. For a lot of people, this is the hardest part of the entire process, because most people just never even finish the first draft. And it can be for, a variety of reasons. Sometimes they just grow bored and disregard it. A lot of times, I think writers see their first drafts and think that they're bad, and that discourages them from continuing. But I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. Every single first draft that's ever been written has been fucking terrible. That's just a fact. There has never been a first draft that is perfect. Any author you can think of, Stephen King, J.K. Rowling, George R.R. Martin, bad example, but you get the point. All of their first drafts are pretty bad. They might be better than mine, personally, they might be better than yours, but they're still bad and they're not publishable. They have to do a ton of work from the first draft on to make a publishable product. So that's the thing that you have to remember. The first draft is just you getting words onto the page. Once you get that, then you can fix it up and make it into something that you're really proud of. And just to show you, I want to read a short passage from the first draft of Super and compare it to the finalized passage in the published book. Now, I should note that I actually wrote 3 versions of Super. So I wrote a first draft a long time ago. It was basically a completely different story. I threw it out, started over, wrote a second first draft about maybe 3 years ago. And it was a bit better, but it wasn't quite what I wanted the story to be. It didn't go where I wanted it to go. So again, I threw it out, started over. And the third time is when I really honed in on where the story was going. So I think overall, because of that process, it's a little cleaner of a first draft than I would have had, but it's still pretty damn bad. So let me just read the short passage. This is from the original first draft. James grabbed his cake and slipped out the back door, unnoticed. He took a seat on the porch, watching the sun make its final stand of the night, like a defeated warrior doing something. Squirrels scampered up the trees and birds chirped restlessly to each other. It was the peaceful something of suburbia. Laughter floated out of the house, and James sighed. So as you can see, when I write my first draft, I like to go and not stop. So a lot of times when I just can't think of something, I'll just write literally the word something, and I know that I'll be able to fill that in later, expand on it, make it better. So it's a pretty, there's some okay sentences in there, but overall as a passage, it's incomplete. It's, very short, and it just could be better. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it could be better. Now let me read in the published book. He grabbed his cake and slipped out the back door, unnoticed, and took a seat on the porch. A light breeze tickled his face as he leaned back and watched the sun make its final stand of the night. A defeated warrior beating a slow retreat, just barely holding off the darkness. Squirrels scampered up the trees and birds chirped restlessly. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the roar of a lawnmower as a neighbor rushed to finish this final chore in the last vestige of light. A peaceful ending to a day in suburbia. Laughter floated out from the house, and James sighed. So there you go. That's just a really quick example of the kind of changes that can be made. And that's from, like I said, a pretty complete passage. There are entire chunks of the first draft just missing. When I hit a scene that I don't know where to go with it, I just skip forward. I'm just like, I'll probably write this later. And then when I go back in the second draft, I hate my past self for not finishing it. What? So that's my tip for you. When you start writing the first draft, and don't stop. Don't look back at what you already wrote. Don't fix typos. Don't do any of that. Just go from start to finish. Get the words on the page. You can edit a terrible draft into something at least okay. You cannot edit nothing into something okay. Just get the first draft done. That's the entire goal. Just get it done. And done can mean different things. It doesn't mean that the story is complete. It doesn't mean that there's not holes within it, but generally a beginning, a middle, and an end. That's the first draft, and that's all you need to do. Don't stress too much about the quality. Now, personally, I don't use outlines. I know some writers do. It's kind of personal preference. I will generally have an idea where the story is going in my head. I'll have an end point in my head, but I don't write anything down. I just start writing and go. And that makes for a less complete draft than probably an outline would provide, but that's okay with me because when I write without a draft, a lot of times I surprise myself and I'll be writing and just letting things flow, and the story will take a turn that I didn't expect, or something that I didn't even know would happens. And it makes it more exciting for me. It's kind of like, then the first draft is me discovering the story, not me filling the holes between plot points, which, again, personal preference. That's just what I do. Now, once I finish the first draft, I set Super aside for a few weeks and focused on some other things just to kind of let it breathe. It allowed me to come in with a more fresh perspective. But then the second draft is where I finish the story. I fill in those holes that are missing. I replace all the somethings with an actual description. I flesh out the characters, flesh out the dialogue. For me, the goal of the second draft is to have a complete story that you could read from beginning to end with no jumps, no missing pieces, and it making sense as a story. It might not be a good story, but it's at least finished. I personally write less in the first draft and then fill it out in the second draft. I know some people are the opposite. They write too much in the first draft and have to cut things. That's not me. That'll never be me. I don't really understand how you accidentally write too much, but maybe that's just because writing is a painful process for me. Then once you have a second draft, from there, every subsequent draft is you cleaning up things, still potentially adding small scenes here and there if you need to, or cutting scenes if you need to, playing around with the details of the characters and the dialogue and really tightening things up. And this for me requires a few passes. I officially on my laptop have a document marked as the fourth draft, but that draft itself went through many passes. So officially Super took 4 drafts, but it was really much more than that, just accounting for small changes with each pass. And then finally, when I felt that it was in as good of a place that as I could take it myself, that's when I brought in the beta readers. And I personally didn't really want to bother too many people I know in my personal life and ask them to read my book, which might be garbage, and spend time critiquing it and all of that. So I went on Fiverr, found a couple beta readers on there, paid them, I don't know, $50 to $90, and got feedback from them. One of my friends did kind of beta read it. He read the first chapter and gave me some feedback, so I guess that counts. But the majority of feedback I got was on Fiverr. They gave pretty valuable feedback, maybe not as much critique as I would have liked. I did worry that because I was paying them, they wouldn't be as critical of the work because they didn't want me to leave a bad review because my feelings were hurt or something like that, but they still gave me pretty good feedback. I took that, incorporated it, did a pass adding or cutting things based on their feedback, another pass just reading through it, making sure that everything looked good. And then from there, I sent it to my editor. My editor's name is Bodie. I found him online. He's fantastic. I'll put a link to his website in the description. He's very busy, so you might not be able to get something scheduled anytime soon, but as an editor, I highly recommend him. He does a great job and provides great feedback. So it was in editor review for about a month, I think. He sent me back an initial pass with a lot of fixes. I went through, cleaned it up, sent it back to him for a second pass, which was more just, making sure that everything looked good. He sent it back to me. I did another pass, finalized everything, and then just for good measure, did another pass where I caught a few small things here and there. So as you can tell, you're gonna be reading your own book a lot. You might grow to despise it with how much you're reading it. And every time you read it, you will catch something. A few small, awkwardly worded phrases or just descriptions that you're like, why did I write that? Why did I think that was a good metaphor? That's terrible. The man was tall and thin, like a totem pole. What? But you're never gonna be done finding things. That's just a fact. As the author, as the person who's been so close to it, you're always gonna be seeking perfection, but never quite reaching perfection. And at some point, you just need to stop. You need to accept, this is my book. Flaws and all, this is my book, and I'm proud of it, and I did it, and it's done. It's time to publish. Otherwise, you'll be spending years just futzing with it and changing small phrases here and there, and probably not even improving it, just changing it for the sake of change because you're too scared to put it out into the world. And I understand that. It's a very scary thing to spend years on something, pour your heart into it, hours and hours, and spend weekends working on it, late nights, and then finally hand it off to the world and say, hey, I hope this isn't terrible. But most likely, if you put the work in, it's not going to be awful. It might not, like I said, it might not be the best book ever written, but people can tell when you put the work into something, and they'll respect that. So if you really did put in the work, then don't be scared. Just hand it off to the world and see what happens. And that's what happened with Super. I was absolutely terrified to share it with the world. In my head, I was like, I feel like this might be okay to good, but I could be completely wrong, and it could be the worst book ever written, and people might laugh at me, and I might get, a ton of 1-star reviews on Amazon, and it might just get destroyed. But that didn't happen. People have been super kind. They've been really supportive of the book. My friends and family and random people online have been amazingly supportive, and it's been so rewarding to see people give their time to this book and really enjoy it. So yeah, that's a very brief overview of the writing process, the writing side of publishing a book, which is the most important side because you're not going to publish a book if you don't first write a book. So I highly recommend that you focus on that. You focus on getting something, putting pen to paper before you even start thinking about, publishing strategies for that. You first need to write a book, write something you're proud of and something that you really would feel proud of putting into the world. I'll talk about this in a later video, but the self-publishing world talks so much about making money and sales and reviews and all of that, and that stuff is important because you're putting a lot of time into this, but a lot of times it skips over writing something that is worthwhile, something that you're really proud of. So just take your time with it. The publishing will come, and it'll be a lot more rewarding if you really took your time with it and created something that you're proud of. It'll be way more rewarding than writing a 100-page book over 3 days and then throwing it up on Amazon. This is a craft, and you're asking people to spend their money and their time reading your book. And if you're not willing to put into the work to make something worthwhile, then you really shouldn't be doing it, because there's plenty of garbage on Amazon that people have to sift through. Yeah, that's all for now. Next video will be about the publication process, some of the tips that I have, some of the mistakes that I made along the way, which there were plenty. So please hit the subscribe button if you want to see more. I guess maybe hit the like button. I don't know. This is weird. I hate being a YouTuber.
I birthed you, but I can't feel you. That's an epidural. Ganja in my Herschel 17s. I keep it plural. Yeah, my crew got more colors than a Philly mural. But we brothers and motherfuckers, we ain't immortal.
But in all